So I'm Mary Elizabeth Iturralde of Mysterious Galaxy Books here in Southern California, and I'm delighted to be hosting the Diana Sister Protagonist panel. And I'm going to continue introducing my authors, and then we'll have a few questions from me, and then we'll take questions from the audience, and there's a microphone set up right there for you to ask your questions at. So next we have Kirsten White, who wore the correct uniform for this panel. Thank you. So Kirsten is one of our local authors. She is the New York Times bestselling author of And I Darken and Now I Rise, in which she reimagines notorious Vlad the Impaler as Lada, the brutal princess. She's also written her Paranormalcy trilogy, dark thrillers, and In the Shadows with Jim DeBartolo. She lives near the ocean here in San Diego, and she is incredibly entertaining and imaginative. Welcome.
No pressure.
Yeah. And she will prove it on this panel, or else. Welcome, Kirsten. And Dana Fredsty. Dana is a former B-movie actress with a background in theatrical combat, a skill she utilized in Army of Darkness as a sword-fighting Deadite and fight captain. Through 7+ years of volunteering at EFBC FCC, she's been kissed by tigers and had her thumb sucked by an ocelot with nursing issues. She's addicted to bad movies and any book or film, good or bad, which includes zombies. She's the author of the Ashley Parker series, touted as Buffy Meets the Walking Dead, the zombie noir novella, A Man's Gotta Eat What a Man's Gotta Eat, and the dark fantasy series, Spawn of Lilith. Welcome, Dana. And Sarah Tarkoff. Sarah currently writes the CW series Arrow. Her other TV writing credits include ABC's Mistresses, Lifetime's Witches of East End, and the animated series Vixen and the Ray. She graduated from USC with a degree in screenwriting, hence all the screenwriting credits, and currently lives in Los Angeles. Her debut novel, Sinless, will be released soon, and we are in the process of getting galleys delivered to her signing area, so you will be able to have an early look. Welcome, Sarah. Nnedi Okorafor is the first Black woman to win the World Fantasy Award for Best Novel. She has also received Hugo and Nebula Awards. She was born in the United States to 2 Nigerian immigrant parents and raised in both countries. She holds a doctorate in English, which I can apparently neither read nor speak, and is a professor at SUNY Buffalo. She divides her time between Buffalo and the suburbs of Chicago. Her works have been published both in Africa and the United States, and they range from early chapter books to adult short stories and longer fiction. And she has written Akata Witch and Akata Warrior, which is forthcoming. Welcome, Nnedi. So, Laurie Forrest's bio reads, Laurie Forrest lives deep in the backwoods of Vermont. And I want to object, because I think it should be Laurie Forrest lives in the forests of Vermont, because that's more entertaining to me. She sits in front of a wood stove drinking strong tea and dreaming up tales full of dryads, dragons, and wands. The Black Witch was her first novel and the recipient of 3 starred reviews. She's also the author of Wand Fasted, an ebook novella / prequel to The Black Witch. Welcome, Laurie. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little was the idea that for a while it was challenging to find representation of yourself in works of fiction unless you were a wealthy, older, white, cis, straight dude. That's changing, and we can be glad that it's changing, but there's also kind of a ways to go. So, hey, it's 11 o'clock on Friday at Comic-Con. Let's start with the easy questions. And Greg sat next to the podium. So what has been accomplished and what can we look forward to in the future in terms of seeing more in the field with diverse protagonists, including females?
So I'm probably least qualified on this panel to speak, and I actually swore to myself I wasn't going to talk first this time. That's such the dude thing to do, but I don't know. I don't know where we're going. I hope that what we're seeing is a trend in the right direction. I hope that I recently described, I was asked a similar question about why there's so many female protagonists now in YA fiction, and I said that I hope that it's corrective, that it's partially to make up for what's been an inadequacy for the majority of publishing's history, if not all of it until now. And even now, the diversity that we have is wanting. I'm going to guess that there's no one here who's read my book because it's not out yet. But I chose to write a female protagonist, and hopefully it was done in a way that you guys will like and be happy with and feel like it's representative. Interestingly, I was just putting this trailer together and I looked up on the internet. Someone else has made a book trailer for my book. It's not even out yet. I was so excited to see this because it was this young Latina girl who created her own book trailer, and what made me so happy about that is that she saw herself in the book. She saw herself in the character. There's nothing else that could make me feel good about having that happen.
So obviously we do have a very long way to go, but I do think it's worth bringing up just how much I think things have changed even in the past few years. When I first, my books started off as a pitch for a movie, and when I took it out, it's a 17-year-old female protagonist, and the first question they asked was like, "Can you make this a 30-year-old white dude?" Because that's that's the actor we can get. That's we can make a bankable movie with a 30-year-old white dude, and I was like, it's a book about like the stress of being beautiful. Like how is that the main character of that story? And so it didn't end up going forward as a movie, but I ended up writing it as a book, and it's a 17-year-old diverse woman, and I think that's not. My publisher, when I was like, I'd like to make her not white, they were like, oh, that's great. I think that we have come a long way, even since I pitched that, 6 years ago. But hopefully, I think the fact that we're continuing to talk about it, hopefully we will keep moving forward.
I think that we are seeing a lot more female protagonists, but for a long time, even in the genre of urban fantasy, which is what I'm writing in, they were still kind of locked in a mold. You had to have the romance, you had to have them be damaged, you had to have certain tropes that just happened, and we're starting to break out of that. When I wrote my Ashley Parker series, I wanted someone that was just a normal woman who was going through normal changes in extraordinary circumstances, but she wasn't necessarily damaged. She was just dealing with a lot of stuff. I think also, as a female writer, a lot of times if you are a male writer, you're allowed to get away with things that, as a woman, that we really can't. A really good example of this, Sylvia Plath, she had some mental issues and she committed suicide, and that always reflects on her poetry. It's sort of like, well, she wrote this, but she was crazy. And there was a male, who was that, Lisa? David Foster Wallace, who also committed suicide, and he is lauded as a genius. So there's just a lot of difference in the way that we are viewed. Sort of like, if you're crazy and you're a woman, well, it's like, pat, she managed to turn out some good stuff anyway. And if you're a guy, it's like, my God, he was a genius, it's too bad he's gone. So there's that.
Yeah, I'll say that when I was growing up, I never saw any reflection of myself in the, especially science fiction or fantasy stories that I was reading. Never. Like, and I look at now, and I just, it's not that I wish that I were born now, because that doesn't make sense, but, you know, I see so much more representation. That said, it's been, at least for me as a woman of color, as a black woman, I've seen the changes happen in a very short period of time. I mean, even when my first novel came out, Zara the Windseeker, that was 2005, and I remember the climate when that book came out. Nobody knew what to do with it. It was a blend of science fiction, fantasy, deeply rooted in Nigerian folklore. Like, from that, the people were Nigerian, there was not a white person in sight, all black. And so you had this story, and when this came out, and I could tell you the whole story of how that book was published, it was not in a traditional way. But when that book came out, I remember the reception of it. And this was just in 2005. Like, nobody knew what to do with that. They looked at it and they're like, okay, this is black science fiction, which blends fantasy. I have other things to say about that, which I won't. Black science fiction, which blends fantasy, this is completely unheard of. You know, what do we do with this? How do we categorize this? Where do we put this in the bookstore? Now, granted, it's still a very small number, but when it comes to people of color writing science fiction and fantasy, you can at least name. There's a list where you can see these writers who are doing, who are publishing wonderful works. There's a list that you can have. Only a few years ago, you could only have that list was so short, I could probably name the number of writers on one.
Right, you could do like Chip Delaney, Octavia Butler, and other people.
Yeah. So that's changed only since 2005. You know, and I think that in the coming years, we're going to see more and more. And I don't like calling it diversity. I just call it humanity. You know, representation of people. And we're gonna see more of that. I think things are opening up, but it is slow. And those places where things need to change are, there are just many of them. There are more than we think. You know, I think you have to notice it first for there to be change. But it's coming. It's coming.
I don't know if you remember a few years ago, a movie came out called Now You See Me Too, which, first of all, now you see me too, not now you don't. And on the poster, they managed to fit, it was something like 12 dudes and one girl in the middle. So you know what her role was. Her role was the girl. It's the Smurfette factor. When you only have one girl, she has to be the girl. That's her only role in the world, is to be female. And it's the same when, like I said, when you're representing humanity, there's not just one version of anything. And my hope, and the thing that I'm enjoying, is as you see more and more work coming in that's embracing this, that's including more women and telling more interesting stories, you're then giving these people who traditionally have not been represented or represented well in media the permission to be people. Like, they can be actual people instead of having to be the stand-in for every character like this because they're the only one. And that's what I've really, really loved seeing, and hope continues, is that as we include more women, as we include more people who are not traditionally featured in narratives, that they're allowed to be people instead of the girl.
Yeah, I guess I'll share just two things that just really excited me that's happening with diversity over the past day, maybe day and a half. These are movies, not books, but you probably all already know this, everybody, that the new Star Trek series is going to have a female captain and also co-captain, and they're women of color too, which is so awesome. And the other thing I read about, which I thought was incredible, was the new Black Panther movie coming out. There's a character who's female who's going to be like a Tony Stark, brilliant scientist character. And as a person who works in the sciences, I'm very excited about that, because I'd like to see that more. It seems like in the past in sci-fi, there's always be this, guy who was the brilliant science guy, and I'm excited to see more of that in sci-fi and fantasy.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
And just to add to everything we just said, we're not saying that the cis white guy, for example, should be erased. We're talking about adding adding just more to, we have those narratives, but we also have other narratives along with them.
It's a story of and, not or.
Yes, yes.
So Kirsten already sort of talked about this and sort of the load-bearing female, right? I have to confess, I stole/adapted that from something Shannon McGuire said, so if that's brilliant, please appreciate Shannon's brilliance and my ability to lift. But one of the ways that I have seen narratives transforming is the ways in which female characters are allowed to have stories that are just about being human, as Nettie pointed out, right? Like, it doesn't have to be the story of being female in that role, but at the same time, there are maybe ways in which you experience things like, terrorizing people and destroying worlds and playing with sharp things. Yes, I'm looking at you, Kirsten, in a way that's maybe different than a male character would. So how do you both give your character all the regular freedoms that she should be enjoying, and how do you also make sure that she's not just what some of the early female characters were, which was sort of the traditional male character, but with a uterus?
I'll jump on that one, I guess. My current book, the heroine Lee, is a stunt woman, and she belongs to a stunt family that has a big secret, and this secret actually ties back to an even larger secret that has to do with the legend of Lilith. And my character, she's in a very masculine environment of the stunt world, and there are a lot of stunt women now, but it still is primarily, I'd say, male-dominated. But I have her basically do things the way that I would, which is you think about things both emotionally and logically. You don't just make a decision, I'm not quite sure how to say this, but it's not just, I'm going to do this because it's the right action to take, or I'm going to do this because, it's going to make me look good. It's using just, I think, a lot more emotions than a lot of your stereotypical male characters do. And I guess that's pretty much my answer for that. I try to do things the way that I would, but a little bit more interestingly and with a lot more,
More demons?
Yeah.
I think you can look a lot to history too. So in Anna Darkin, my main character Lotta is a gender swapped Vlad the Impaler, because I learned all about his history, and I thought, boy, he'd be fun as a teenage girl. I do have a teenage daughter, but her path toward power is a very traditionally masculine path. She sees this is the way that you get power in the world, so that's the way that I'm going to do it. And I was very aware that I was writing sort of a very masculine approach to the accumulation of power, which is kill everything that gets in your way. And so it was very important to me that I also highlighted different ways that in this historical time period where women were property, there were ways to find power, and there were ways to find influence and security. And one of my favorite historical figures that I researched was Theodora of Byzantium. And she was the children of actors, and she was an actress, which meant that she performed a lot of different things. And she was used, she was taken to Egypt by an older man and then abandoned there. She had to make her way back, and she eventually attracted the eye of Emperor Justinian. And he couldn't marry her because she was an actress, but he fell deeply in love with her because she was good at telling stories and because she was interesting to talk to. And once his mother died, he said, hey, I'm the emperor, I can do whatever I want. He married her. And then a few years later, there was an uprising, and there was a huge group in the stadium that was going to come and take the throne and give it to one of his cousins. And he and his advisors were like, we gotta get the heck out of here, they're gonna kill us all. But Theodora, who had never had power and had had to work her way up and fight for every scrap of stability and safety that she had in the world, was like, no. Because as soon as we walk out of Constantinople, we are never getting back. Because if you let them take what we already have, it's never going to be ours again. So she's like, turn around, get all your men, go to the stadium, and kill all of them. And they did. And because of that, Justinian was able to stay emperor. Theodora was co-emperor. She was not emperor consort, she was co-emperor. And she's actually the one who started construction on the Hagia Sophia, which still stands. And she took everything that she had and she used her power to really improve women's rights and their rights to property, their rights in marriage and divorce in her sphere of influence. So I think you can see those things, and you can see historically what women have done. They haven't necessarily always had the easy access to power, but the ways that they get power and the things that they do with it once they have it, I think are very telling and very inspiring.
So in my story, the main character stops speaking after the first, well, technically the third chapter, but she really only says one sentence throughout the whole book. And when I was putting that together in my head, it seemed more logical to me to have a female protagonist because I think women are silenced more, and I think especially girls feel like their voice is not heard. And if you want to, read that as a metaphor, you may. But then because I was in the realm of dystopia, there's this expectation of, having the love triangle, the romance, and I didn't want any of that in there because she is leading a revolution without talking, so how does she have time? Does she have time to have a romance? And if you think about what would that romance look like? It would be kind of gross, right? That isn't to say there isn't anyone who's perhaps interested in her in the story, but I think you have to, ask yourself what that person's coming to the relationship with. But there's no romance in the story to speak of.
To speak of.
Yeah, for my characters, I don't really give them attributes, they take them. My characters, they come to me whole with all of their flaws and their gifts, all of that. And so I write about them. My character in the Akata series, they are Sunny especially, she's Nigerian American. She just happens to be Nigerian American. She just happens to have albinism, and she's a very gutsy character. It wasn't that I sat down to write this type of character like I was responding to anything. This is just who she is, and I've noticed that with all of my books, that these women come to me with these just a diversity of qualities. And so I write them, and I don't really shy away from letting them be who they are. So some of them may have very disturbing characteristics. Some of them may be, actually a lot of them, may be very, very angry. Angry women are a type of characters that I've seen, that I've realized that I write a lot. Even Sunny in the Akata series, she fights a lot. She's not afraid of a fight. When it comes to her and there are 3 people coming at her, she just goes right in there. And in my other characters, anger has been a very a thread that I've seen throughout all of my characters. And there's that label of the angry black woman that's always kind of hovering over my head. And when I'm writing, I don't let that affect what I'm writing. I write the characters the way that they come to me, and I feel like I let them be who they are. And I think that's really important because it's important to see female characters that are complex, that have flaws, that do things the wrong way, but also do extraordinary things in different, and just operate in different ways. I think that's really important, and I hope that I'm contributing to that. And I think that a lot of female writers, especially recently, are getting the chance to portray those types of characters, and that's really important.
And I'm going to say I'm a huge Nettie fan, so I'm just going to fangirl for a minute. In Lagoon, the thing that impressed me the most was because your characters feel like real people. They feel fully realized. When they do things out of anger or they make maybe questionable decisions, you understand, you feel that compassion because it never feels like they're doing it because the plot demands it or because, that's what you feel like they should do. Like, they feel like real people, and I think that's what you capture so well. And that's what all characters need to be. They need to feel like real people. When they feel like real people, these choices that they make, the anger that they feel, we understand it.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. And I think when we're looking at, how do we make fully fleshed out female characters? How do we make, because as a woman who's never really felt like I fit that sort of feminine mold, I've always appreciated characters that stepped outside of that. But I think it's also worth looking at our male characters, and how much are we making our male characters fit inside this masculine mold? And because I think as a culture we don't necessarily value feminine strength in the same way that we value masculine strength. You have Wonder Woman, who's an amazing character, and as a person who writes superhero shows, like, I'm a huge fan. But you also, I think, her power is really, she didn't come here to win this war, she came here to stop this war. She has this very feminine strength, and I think playing up the feminine in your male and female characters, those more traditionally feminine strengths, is worth looking at.
Yeah. I have a
I also-
character.
one-
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a character in my book who I actually set out to write a completely empowered character, which was a lot of fun. To try and imagine what it would be like to be someone who has 100% confidence, 100% power, does not question it for a moment, even if everybody in the room questions it, completely confident. And my character is named Diana. She's a wolf shapeshifter, and she's not my very main character of the series, but it was my main character comes from a very unempowered place. So it was very interesting when these two characters come together to have them kind of play off each other. And when I saw the Wonder Woman movie, which is why I kind of was excited about the title of this, I couldn't believe how much the personality of Wonder Woman in the movie was like this character Diana in my book. And what's funny too is as people are reading the book and writing letters to me, they love this character, this totally confident, powerful female character Diana. So.
Well, and that's actually, sorry, Greg.
I just wanted to say something about this idea of anger, and the male ownership of anger, because I suspect that most of these books contain issues of injustice, and when you have injustice, I think it's difficult. Maybe it's just difficult for me, but I can't imagine writing a character who doesn't have some anger at injustice. It's just a feeling that comes up. So if you're going to limit that to, well, only men can have that feeling, then suddenly you can't fight the injustice, which I think is a trick. Like, it's just a mind game being played by the man.
Good point.
Thank you. Sort of jumping off of Lori's comments about multiple female characters, one thing that I'm enjoying when I see it, but would like to see more of, is not just the strong female protagonist who mostly has relationships with male characters. I look for more female friendships. I feel like, especially in YA dystopia, too often if there's another female character, she's only there for the romantic triangle, which, don't get me wrong, I like romance, even like smut, but that's another topic. But once again, you want people to be people, not plot devices. And frankly, in the Wonder Woman movie, that was one thing I thought was they didn't give enough time on screen for, was Diana lives on Themyscira, and then she goes to man's world, and then she mostly just hangs out with dudes. And I would be like, no, this is not my experience. I need to make new best friends with other women here. How have you worked to make sure that you have a well-rounded protagonist who's interacting with characters who are not just male?
I'll say this. What you said just reminded me of some early dealings that I had with Who Fears Death. My novel, Who Fears Death, was a few years ago, was optioned for a film. And I remember having some discussions, and it's not under that option anymore, and I'm very glad about that. But I remember having some discussions, and I have not spoken about this publicly, but now I am. I'm going to do that. I'm doing it. But had some discussions about iterations of Who Fears Death. So Who Fears Death, there's a big part of it where there are how many women? I think it's four female characters. I hope I'm getting that right. It's either 4 or 5, whatever. And they're all friends, and they're all different. They all have their own personalities, and they interact, and there's a whole chunk of the book of these women interacting with each other, fighting, all this stuff, laughing, all that. And that's a big part of the book. When I wrote Who Fears Death, that was very important to me to have these women they're on this journey, but they're friends, and they go through normal things and have normal issues. And when we were talking about the film version of Who Fears Death, there was some discussion that caused me to have no sleep. Like, I sleep very well, normally sleep very well. This comment caused me, like, not to sleep that night. And you have to do a lot to mess with my sleep. And it was that, oh, there's too much estrogen in this story. That is the exact quote. That is the exact quote. I remember it. Too much estrogen. And it was suggested to me to get rid of 3 of the female characters, and not only that, replace them with male characters. So I was just like, just having all kinds of issues. And that highlighted the exact issue you're talking about of this feeling that it is not important to have a powerful, you have the heroine or whatever, the main character, which could be any kind. She could be powerful, she can be more cerebral, whatever. But her need to interact with other women, that is so important in a story. I think it adds to the main character. It says a lot about the main character. It says a lot about that world. It says a lot about the point of the plot. There's so much. And to take that element out or to act like that element is not important says a lot. And what it says is not good. So yeah, that's what your comment reminded me of. Now I'm going to try to forget it. Just put it right back.
That has never been an issue for me because all of my life I've always had, female best friends, and it's just never been in all of my books, just thinking of the Ashley Parker books and in Lilith, there's just, different kinds of relationships. In the Plague books, there's almost like the little sister character for my heroine. In Lilith, her best friend is an actress she meets. And the one thing I'll say is that she starts the book out not really having many friends that aren't involved in the stunt world, and there's a lot of competition between the women that she knows there. So when she meets this actress on one of the films, she's actually almost like it's not a romance, but it's the same kind of nervousness, like, oh my God, what if I screw this up? So yeah, that's just so much part of my life that I think that just sort of bleeds over into my work. So.
I think too, you get fed so many narratives by media and by the things that you read and watch growing up. In some of my earlier books, I would introduce another girl character as sort of like a rival to the main character, and my plan was to have her be like the mean girl. And every single time, as soon as I started actually writing that character, they would become a person, and I would be like, oh, this is not a way that girls actually function. And just because one is inside the group and one side is outside the group doesn't mean that they're going to be opposed. And they almost always end up being best friends that use their differences to help each other's lives, which is what women do. Yeah. That's what we do. And it's something that I had to be very conscious of, very, very aware of, that was a narrative that had been drilled into my brain, that even being a girl who has relationships with other women that have been like the formative relationships of my life, I was still defaulting to that, and it was something that I had to actively correct.
Yeah, I think that's it, that we live in a culture where, we're just sort of inundated with these messages of, doctors are men. And so I think like if you sit and you think about your characters and it's like, okay, does this doctor have to be a man? Does the leader of this rebellion have to be a man? Because for the most part, your characters are going to be, in my books, my main character is very focused with, taking down the bad guys. And so the people that she's interacting with, it's like, just can you make those characters female?
Why can't it be Nurse Who?
Yeah.
So because my protagonist doesn't talk, she's a little bit behind the 8 ball in having any kind of relationships in the book. But she still has them, and some exist from before. There's a complicated relationship with her sister that is, I hope, reads as important throughout the book. And then, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but there is a sequel, and there's a character who's sort of a tertiary character named Sarah Croat, and she's become very important in that sequel. And it's not a romance, and it's not a friendship, but their relationship is one of the most interesting things I was able to find, looking at who she relates to and how that happens. So,
I think one of the most enjoyable things about writing my series, The Black Witch Chronicles, is developing this kind of core group of young women who do become close friends. When they first meet each other, though, in my first book, The Black Witch, Some of these women come from extremely different cultural and religious backgrounds than my main character, which creates a huge amount of conflict at first when they're thrown in to live with each other. But it's definitely been one of the most enjoyable parts of the series is watching those relationships come together, and something I hope to continue this core group throughout the entire series.
Okay, so I'm going to open to questions from the floor now. As much as possible, it'd be lovely to have questions that apply to most of our panelists, but I know some people's books exist only in the future, and so, you might not know quite what to ask Sarah about Sinless or Greg about All Rights Reserved.
Hi, I have a general question about the ways that we can affect our world. As a white cis woman, I'm aware that when I watch Furiosa and get excited to see myself there, that not all women see themselves there. And just as a respectful aside, not all women have uteruses, and not all uterus havers are women. But I want to know, beyond just consuming the media, is there power in who we are on social media? Is there power in who we follow? Do the people who make books notice if an author has a lot of followers and retweets or that kind of thing? So are there things we can do in our activism that I guess are more slackivism, but do those have any power?
So the first thing that the publisher will pay attention to is the dollars. So buy what matters to you. Sure. I guess the Twitter followers matter too, I think.
I think wherever you can, you have not an obligation, but you should elevate voices that typically have been not elevated or not given a platform, and that's something that I've tried to be very aware of the last few years. Is whose voice am I elevating? Whose work am I supporting in whatever way I can? And what ways can I better support these voices that we need more of? So just being aware of what, like you said, how are you spending your money? What are you essentially voting that you want to see more of with your dollars and with your time?
When I buy books, or when I go to conferences and I meet other writers, it really matters to me whether or not they are, good people. Some of my favorite writers I discovered aren't really the type of people that I necessarily want to support, and I've met some other people, writers that are really well known that are always trying to lift other writers up with them, and they don't necessarily need my money, but because of what they do, I will always buy their books, and I also really like to read them. I also admit when I go online and I'm looking at social media, do they have cats? I'm easy that way. But yeah, I agree. It's just, I'm not saying don't buy books that you love because the writer's politics may not necessarily be yours, but think about it and think about what you're supporting. I'm kind of echoing with slightly different words and adding cats to what they said. So, and dogs too.
Yeah, I think it's tough because unless you're in if you're able to, anyone who has the power to elevate those voices and to, give creators who wouldn't necessarily fit into those nice, neat boxes the opportunities to tell their stories and stories about, people that they know and stuff. I think that's.
Do I have to say something? I mean, I don't think I'll say anything that hasn't already been said. I will say that social networking is very powerful, and I'm still trying to figure out how it works. But I think that if you support something, put it out there and see what happens. Because like I said, I don't exactly know exactly how it works, but sometimes when you say something, it can go farther than you think. And so that's something to keep in mind.
I've been really inspired by the people that I've met on social media. I didn't even really know how Twitter worked until my imprint said, you need a social media presence, because I had none. But it's been pretty incredible getting to know so many just the authors I've met are so inspirational. And the fan, private messaging that I've gotten about my book has been wonderful. My book's, in a fantasy way, is pretty political. And my protagonist comes from extremely closed, very very fascist magical society, and she's been taught to believe that everybody else is just horrible and evil and wrong. And over the course of the narrative, she starts to get to know what's going on in the world and gets to know all these other people. But I've gotten a lot of letters from people who've grown up in extremely, real world societies that are very closed, and just, hearing their stories about that they, felt like stories are important that talk about what it's like to get out of that mindset, to, just to move out of that and to have your prejudices challenged. So.
And I do want to acknowledge the importance of words and say that I'm sorry for being exclusionary in my attempt at shorthand.
Sorry, short. So it was said a lot on this panel, like it was really discussed how women are taking these lead spotlights and sort of taking the spot that a lot of cis, white, straight men have been in for a long time. But my question is sort of a two-parter. The first is, do you think that there is any truth to, I think there's a real safety net that media is using with cis, straight, white women taking these leading roles? And especially, do you think moving forward with young adult fiction, we'll get to see more representation of non-binary people, and especially of people of color that are not on the I'm a woman, I'm a man cis spectrum?
Have you watched Sense8?
I have not, but I've heard it's amazing.
They did cancel it, and it's a shame because it is one of the first and only shows I know of that just pretty much across the board represents everyone, and it's strong and it's powerful, and it talks about, sex isn't something to be ashamed of. It's got all sorts of different relationships, and it is just amazing. And I think the reason it was canceled is that it's just too much for people at this point. It's just kind of like, oh my God, there was an orgy scene and there was everything, but it's just beautiful. I mean, my husband and I love that show, and I do think, that maybe it's a little too soon for the majority of people to be able to accept that now, but I think we are moving for that, and we should be, and we should constantly strive to be. And the main reason, my heroines tend to be straight white women is simply because that's what I'm familiar with, and I don't really want to step on toes by trying to write a character that unless I can get inside their head, actually research for it. It's hard for me because I don't want to offend anyone, and I don't want to exclude anyone. So that is something that I struggle with as a writer. I'm not quite sure how to handle that yet, and I grew up, born in the 60s. I grew up in, the Mad Men era, so it's been an interesting challenge. So.
One thing I would like to add with Sense8, and this is a less popular opinion with it because I love Sense8, but and this kind of addresses your question of what can we see with where it's not just a certain type that's in the forefront. Even though I love Sense8, you still had the main characters still looked, they still fit a certain mold visually, if that makes sense.
Pretty.
Yeah, they're all very pretty. And even the word saying very pretty, it's like, we all know what that means. I usually put quotes when I write it, because, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Exactly. But they still look a certain way. And even when we're addressing these issues, when we're seeing these issues addressed in various, especially in TV and film, this is where I notice it the most, there's still that safety. I'm constantly saying, where are the bigger women? Where are the bigger men? I'm always saying that. And that, I'm not going to start ranting.
That's actually kind of a nice segue into Sarah's book, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting better, but there's still a ways to go. I'll stop.
I think there's also a lot of hope in the younger generations. Just my kid's favorite show is Steven Universe, where one of the main characters is a literal embodiment of a lesbian relationship, which is so cool, and she's the best. But they love that, and my daughter now is writing graphic novels about two girl cats from different clans who are in love with each other, and it's the cutest, you guys. It's so cute. The tagline is, "Who cares if we're gay?" And my hope is that as this media is coming to the forefront, as we're telling these stories, that hopefully we can shift that, and as these younger generations grow up and become storytellers and choose what stories they want, that they can push forward that change that maybe older viewers are not necessarily responding to as well right now.
And I think there's also sort of a fear if it's not your world that you're going to portray it wrong. I wrote on a show called Mistresses, and we had a trans character on that show played by a trans actor, and we had someone from GLAAD come in and basically tell us, these are the issues. This is we talked through the story that we wanted to do. He said, this is here's my suggestions on the words you should and shouldn't use, and it was definitely all new for us, and it was just we wanted to portray it sensitively, and so if you don't necessarily have those resources, you just want to be able to reach out to whoever you can to try to portray it accurately.
And when you get feedback from fans that may say, hey, this bothered me, this offended me, whatever, take it seriously, give it some thought. So.
When I first started to get to know the other authors in my imprint, we started to read each other's books. One of the authors called me and was like, I'm so happy you have a demisexual character in your book. And I was like, what does that mean?
That's what I was just thinking now.
And I'm betraying my age here. But it just seemed natural for my character that she felt like she's kind of a freak. She's just not interested. And I'm not going to give away what happens to her character. But then I looked it up, and I was like, yeah, I wrote an absolute demisexual character. I didn't set out to write one, but I did, naturally, And then I went to the internet, and I looked up all the different stuff going on with this explosion of ways people can be and still feel normal, because there's so many ways that people are and always have been. But it's great. It's great, and it's inspirational, and it's definitely going to impact, as I write the rest of the series, definitely impacting my characters that I'm bringing in, relationships. I don't know, just freeing, I think.
All right, Greg. It's going to be very funny given the topic, but did you want to do one last quick comment? Because we have hit our stop sign.
So the progress is always going to be slower than you want. That's an unfortunate and painful reality. And I think about this as a teacher, that not everyone learns the same way. And unfortunately, that applies to stuff that we should know and don't. I thought we'd be a lot further along than we are, and I probably feel that way again in 10 years. So, but ultimately, my answer to your question is yes.
All right, thank you all so much.